Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. We talk with professionals who work across the span of content strategy, from small businesses to big enterprises, from content design to content marketing, from solo consultancies to huge agencies. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast. This is episode number 36 of the show that used to be called the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. I'll do a separate post on the rebranding. But branding is kind of an appropriate thing to talk about because today I have with us an expert in branding. Jenn Marie is kind of a typical content strategist in the sense that she has a really diverse background. She's been a model and spokesperson. She's been a freelance journalist. She's done technical support work as well as technical sales and pre-sales. And she's written poetry. So she's a word nerd, a word person like all of us with a lot of diverse business experience. But I want to let Jenn tell you a little bit more about herself right now.
Hello, everyone. So thanks for the wonderful introduction. And I don't know where to start. But as you said, I do have a bit of a diverse background. And my explanation for it generally is I did whatever I need to, make money. I've always been the type of person that I do things that I enjoy. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to have multiple jobs that I've enjoyed. I started off, my first job was, what was my first job? I think my first job was telemarketing. So I was on the phones trying to get people to make donations. And from there, I started working in tech. I was selling computers for Dell. And I never really intended to go into sales. That was kind of an interesting thing. It just looked like a cool job. And it was through a staffing agency. And the lady goes, "Have you done sales before?" And I said, "No." She goes, "Well, sell me this pen." I'm like, "What pen?" She's like, "The pen right on my desk." So I had to come up with a pitch right there on the spot. And apparently it was good enough because I ended up selling computers after that. But I'm not really the most aggressive salesperson. So what ended up happening is I got back into customer service, and the next job after that was Microsoft and then Amazon. And the cool thing about Dell was that it was their direct stores. Because if you know anything about Dell, it's an online. Mostly they sold online, especially in the early 2000s. You call and order your computer. And so what they did, they realized is that it's hard to sell people a computer for using the internet when they don't know how to use the internet. So they needed people like me to explain to them, hey, this is how you use the internet to order a computer, and this is what you can do with it once you have it. So that really got me into the mode of being more of an explaining type salesperson rather than just you buy this because you need it. I was really teaching people how to use services, and that led to software as a service eventually. um, and so the next job was Microsoft and pre-sales, and then Amazon, which was amazing because I really got to go deeper into the internet aspect of the world. Being Amazon being a huge internet-based company, and really learn a lot about branding and marketing because that company is really, really good at marketing. So and copywriting and all that wonderful good stuff. So did a lot of reading while I was helping customers, explaining product descriptions, and going through and making sure that content is written in a way that a customer can just go in and be like, "This is what I'm buying. This is what it's going to do for me." And eventually I took all that experience and just said, hey, I could possibly do this myself. In between all of that, because those jobs weren't really enough to support my family, I had second job, and my second job was working as a spokesperson. And my first client was for Dove. They had a project that a lot of people are familiar with, their campaign for Real Beauty, which was what year was that? 2004 to 2008, I believe. And what they did was I think it was the first time we really started seeing this in marketing. Now it's super common. You go on Instagram, you see this all the time nowadays. But what Dell did was put the marketing back into the everyday person. So the campaign for Real Beauty was trying to show that any woman can be beautiful, any size, any complexion, if you use Dove products. So the way the way they promoted this was to hire a whole bunch of average looking females to hold soap samples in Costco's and say, buy this soap, try this soap. And the idea was that when customers saw someone with good looking skin, that they would associate that clear, good looking skin with the product, and then they'd buy the product. um, Brand experience, experiential marketing is what that's called. And I got heavily involved into that. And although I was at the side of, I was the person that they were using to create that experience, I was really interested into this whole concept of experiential marketing. Like, really, you can create an entire like experience of something that makes people react a certain way and you can get them to buy things. This is fascinating. So um, that is where my experiential and my marketing background really came into play, is doing that. And um, I got to work with a lot of brands as a spokesperson, and it was very fulfilling.
Now that, I want to back. I want to. That's interesting to me because I know we've also talked about you've been an internet enthusiast and practitioner since like the mid '90s, like me, like
Yes.
way back. And so, and as you're doing this Dove thing, I kind of picture you going like, "Wow, if only there were a global interactive medium where I could also do this." Was that part of your transition to where you are now?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Because what I've learned with a lot of these big brands, they have very separate departments for internet and for experiential. So they kept them really, really separate at first, at least in the mid 2000s. I got out of experiential marketing about 2009, 2010, and I was noticing a shift that they were starting to expect the spokespersons to also be internet influencers. So then they would, like, as you were getting hired for projects, they'll ask you for your Instagram and your Facebook as well and ask you to promote to your friends. But I think it becomes a little bit problematic because it's like then you have to screen the spokesperson to make sure that their network is the network that you want, you know? Whereas before, you can put them in a certain experience and make them part of what you're looking for, if that makes any sense. So, like, you see more college branded promotions where it's like, okay, we're going to send you on a college campus, and we actually need you to be a student at that college because they're trying to get all the students at that college. So,
Right. But now I want to kind of jump forward to today because you're working more with smaller companies now, right? You're like certainly not Amazon and Microsoft and Dove, the big brands like that. Did you take lessons from those experiences, and does that translate to the branding work you do now?
yeah, I definitely did. My first client, out of that background, what happened was I was working as a spokesperson for a LASIK company, and I met a small business owner, a company called Idaho Beef, and he wanted to reach more people. And I just saw a really good opportunity to take all that experience I had and do it for him. So the first thing was like, okay, first of all, you need a website. Man, we went back and forth for like 2 years as to whether or not he needed a website. He's a traditional um, cowboy, firefighter, makes, what does he do? He makes uh, post fences and stuff. I mean, he doesn't deal with internet and marketing and stuff like that. So I eventually was able to build him a website and a Facebook page and an Instagram, and it made a difference um, for him. I didn't really have to brand him per se because he was already a brand. What I had to do was take that brand that he had and put it on the internet. So my idea was that people he was using only experiential marketing in terms of he'd went to the fair, the Puyallup Fair, when it was called at the time here in Washington, and he'd go to other like events and he'd just show up. He was that experience. People liked the experience of, oh, this is an actual cowboy. Yes. So I had to take that experiential side and put it into the internet. so that when they went looking for him and they pulled up a website, they got the same experience as if they met him at the fair. It was tall order.
No, but that's everybody's order now, is like
Yeah.
that if you aren't authentically expressing yourself on the internet, people are just going to ignore you, or recognize that you're a fraud or whatever. So that's great. You had sort of a slam dunk in terms of his profile as somebody to work with. But I assume you've been able to take those principles that you used with him, and well, how has that worked with other people? Like, have you done the opposite, like kind of cultivated or like extracted a persona from people, or how has that worked, I guess?
Yeah. So based off of him, how that went, I now like to have clients like that. I prefer working with entrepreneurs or creatives. A lot of times, like, artists and musicians, they have a brand, they have a personality. They're not just a product, they're a person. And if they have something about them that's unique, I meet with them, I talk with them, and I try to figure out what that is. And then we talk about, okay, who's your ideal client? Who's your target demographic? And we look at what they say to those people and what those people are looking for, and we put that in a website. So when I say I do branding, that's the branding aspect of it, is helping small business owners and entrepreneurs understand what their brand is. Because a lot of times they don't realize it. They're like, oh, I'm just being me. Yes, you are.
Mhm.
But you have people that are following you. You have people that are paying you, not necessarily because of what you do, but because of who you are. So, like, if you're an artist, people aren't really paying for the fact that you made a painting. They're paying for the uniqueness of that painting. They're paying for the story that came behind the artist making it a lot of times. And so you have to really bring that out into the website, and you explaining that to some people, they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So I, it's a little bit of counseling and business development, but it's also branding and copywriting too, because you have to end up
Right.
writing all that stuff to the website.
And all those things you just mentioned, I kind of picture a lot of this as Venn diagrams. Like, and the two of the bigger Venn diagrams are kind of branding and content strategy. Like, there's a huge overlap there. They can each inform one another. But for you, the way you're operating, I'm going to guess that there's sort of just part of what you're bringing to people. Is that sort of how or have you thought about that relationship between branding and your content strategy when you work with folks?
Yes. Well, they're two different things, but because when I say I do internet marketing, I say I specifically only do content marketing, because obviously there's different types of internet marketing. And when you're explaining this to an entrepreneur or a small business, they don't really understand that. So the first thing I start with is like, okay, let me break down the different types of internet marketing. You've got SEO, you've got content, and you've got like ads. So first we have to figure out, who you are and what your brand is going to be. And then second, we need to figure out what's the best type of marketing. Generally, I use this period as a way of weeding out clients that aren't going to be a good match for me. Because if they say, oh, I just want to show up in Google, I'm like, okay, well, go see an SEO person, you know? Um, but if they say, I want people to know who I am, I want to be matched with my ideal client, then I say, well, then let's do a content strategy. Let's get who you are out there. Let's build as much content as possible for people to know who you are. And I'm not saying flood the internet with spam. I'm saying flood it with helpful information that gives people a taste of the services that you offer that you can afford to give away. So, and generally, the next thing is, I can't write that much content. And then I say, but I can. So that's the whole ecosystem of how they work together. But if I do get a client that just needs branding, I'll just do branding. I prefer not to. Or if they have branding already and they're like, we already have a brand, we already have our strategy, we just need you to do the content. Fine. Tell me what your branding is and your target, and we'll make it perfect. But they all are together under one large umbrella of what I like to focus on.
Got it. How does your work break down? You do. I know you have a lot of writing experience and are a good writer and have written a lot. Is that most of what you end up doing, or do you end up doing a lot of the strategy and that kind? I love the table setting work you're doing about explaining to them the difference between SEO and content marketing and things like that. How does your typical client or day break down? I guess.
I wish I had a typical.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I should clarify that I have a team. So I don't do as much writing as I used to. When I first started, it was, um, I think I set a limit of like 3 or 4,000 words per day of writing. So I just write that much and that was it. Oh, and I spend like some time soliciting new clients. So an hour sending out proposals, 4 to 5 hours of writing per day. That's what
Right.
it first started out. But now, what I would typically do is check with my clients for any projects. If it's a project that I need to do personally to write, I'd write it. I've kind of limited my work to about 2,000 words per day now. The rest I outsource to my team. I have a team of about 6 content writers that all have varying skills. So I specialize with who gets what projects based on the writer's interest, backgrounds, and type of writing that I know they're good at. So, like, I have one writer who's really good at blogs. She does the blogs. I have another one who's an excellent copywriter. She's got like a marketing degree from Gonzaga, and she's really good at writing copyright. You know, so and I have another one who's an excellent clickbait. Excellent. You know, so it just depends on what the client needs and past I a lot of times I'd have to figure out the strategy that we're going to be doing. So they only write, so anything outside of writing I have to do, and then once I get the stuff back I edit it and do all final copies. Sometimes I have to edit it a couple times for the clients if they don't like what we turn in, but um, I would say most of my day nowadays is management of the process and um, relationship building with my clients, and sometimes strategizing new content. Because like for one of my clients, I'm the blog manager, so I get there is a website manager who he's in charge of all the marketing for the site as well as all of the management of the WordPress site, making sure it's a Shopify site. So it's a huge
Hmm.
setup. So he manages all the everything involved, and he also comes up with the marketing strategies. But I'm in charge of the blog. So a lot of the content he strategizes himself. But if I have another idea based on what the users would want, what the readers would want, then it comes back on me to come up with ideas. He's more of the this is the content we need for marketing, and I'm more of the this is what people want to read.
Well, that I wonder.
So
So that I've been dying to work in the other thing you talked about when I saw you speak in Seattle, UX, user experience, and I wonder if that. So that's kind of getting at that. Like you're saying, well,
yeah,
that's fine that you have this stuff you want to get out there, but we're equally concerned with the users and the customers. So tell me how that fits in. How you're because you articulated that as I think the title of your talk was something about UX and content strategy, or UX and brand
branding and UX user
branding and use.
experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me how those fit together for you and in your work with your folks.
So I think, and just to add as a segue, the background to that, the other job I left off is I was a journalist. So between the time working for Dell and telemarketing, I got a part-time job as a journalist because I wrote something in college. I was delivering newspapers. I shared it with the editor, and they go, "You're writing for us now." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So,
Nice.
um, having a journalism background, I had a scholarship to UNC Chapel Hill School of Journalism. Um, I've been trained in journalism. I just never actually worked after that. I did like 2 years of it as a contributing writer, but I never went into it full time. And having that background of really focusing on the content and the readers has made a big difference in internet marketing. I think if I didn't have that, I'd get caught up in um, the more copywriting form of it. I don't know the better way of putting it, but the numbers. You get caught up in how many times did I put this word and how many times did I do this, and not really thinking about did I answer the question that the user is looking for?
No, I think
Just
you're getting at a thing I see all the time is that and I've talked to enough people in the field now that like I think sometimes the marketing oriented copywriters struggle more with content marketing than journalists, because journalists are perfectly suited to put out authoritative, interesting stories about stuff, whereas marketing copywriters are like, oh, I got to convince them, I got to persuade them. Is that because you mentioned you have in your group of folks both like people with marketing backgrounds and people with, it sounds like, with journalism backgrounds. Do you see that play out like the way I just described it?
yeah, and it's very interesting. The girl that does most of my copywriting stuff, like her background is public relations and marketing, and I have to remind her all the time, don't sell, just talk to the consumer. I told you who we're writing to, just talk to them. That's it. You know? Whereas the other girl she's not a journalist, but she's a translator. That's her professional background.
Oh, interesting.
So she plays with words a lot, and she likes the idea of, just talking. And so I give her an assignment, and she's basically just talking. So I have to remind her, hey, make sure you put this call to action in there, but I have to spell out the call to action and tell her what it is and where to put it. So there's definitely that different, background.
Mhm. Well, that's it. What you just said is interesting to me. That putting a call to do. I know this varies from project to project, but I think everybody's so concerned now with measuring content effectiveness and figuring out how a piece of content is performing. Personally, I think a lot of that, like if you do an SEO or a bigger content marketing campaign, that you're not always going to see instant and identifiable results. But for the most part, you try to put some kind of call to action in all of your content, or most of it.
Every piece of writing should have some sort of call to action, unless it's no, every piece of writing has a point. Let me just put it that way. Even poetry has an underlying message that you're trying to relay. With copywriting, you're trying to convince people to feel a certain way or to do a certain thing. I tend to do copywriting that convinces people to feel a certain way. I'm not a big person on the do a certain thing, but if I'm given a call to action, or if there's a specific call out of this is what we're trying to do, I'll put it on there. Um, but I don't like the idea that you just write to write. No one just writes to write. You're communicating. It's a form of communication. Um, Early on in the internet, when I first started, like 2005, 2006, when I first started doing writing professionally, there's a lot of writing that was just writing. It was just blah 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 blah. And then we started doing the call to actions, which I was just like, yes, thank you. That way people can just skip all of the crap and get right to the, okay, this is what you want me to do. You want me to click here. Okay, I can do that. Um, so I am a fan of the call to action, but I'm not really. I think the problem is that people just focus on that and they don't make sure that the rest of the content actually says something. And that's when the user experience comes in, because the words that are on the website are part of the experience that someone's having. And, people will drop all this money into the design and the colors and the fonts and all this other stuff. And they're just like, oh, just throw some words on there. People don't read anyway. Yeah, they don't. But when they do, they're going to be very irritated if they, find something that's just complete fluff and nothing,
Mhm.
make a somewhat of an effort. And that is extremely, it's just really one of my pet peeves with user experience. I mean, with the whole internet world right now, is that there's not a lot of focus on the experience of the user. um, I think Amazon does an excellent job of user experience and copywriting, a good mixture of it. If you've ever been, I've been asked to do Amazon pages. They're very specific on how their product pages can be written. They can't have any claims that are not true. You can't say have this inflated writing. They try to tone down the over the top marketing copy.
Mhm. I just
And
want to clarify real quickly there. Are you talking about like because a huge amount of the stuff on Amazon is in the marketplace versus like products that Amazon is just selling. Is
The
this
marketplace.
this is in the marketplace? Okay, yeah. So they have like a voice and tone and style guide kind of. Yeah, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
So some of the upper end sellers, it depends on your sale volume. Apparently, you can be allowed to do a special Amazon page rather than the generic one that Amazon builds out for you. If you're of a certain level, then you can write your own page. And a lot of those sellers don't know how to write it within the guidelines that Amazon gives you, and the guidelines are really hard. You really do have to hire a professional copywriter to write it within the guidelines that Amazon says they want.
Got it. I
So,
guess once you've hacked that, that's probably your full-time job, right? There must be people who
yeah,
write those.
yes, there's people that just write those. So I've gotten to do one of those, and it was fun. But I totally respect their guidelines of um, their point of view is we want to make it easy and accessible to the readers. We want them to be able to scan through and not have to decide whether this is hype or not. Useful information, and it was just really good. I mean, it's a little dry. I like to add more personality than Amazon allows, but I think if anyone was looking for a really good way to write copy for a e-commerce site, just go through the marketplace and read some of the good ones on there.
Right. Well, if anybody's figured out e-commerce, I think they kind of have. Yeah. Hey, Jen, I know these things always go so quick. We're coming up on time. I always like to give my guests an opportunity. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet, or that I've forgotten to ask that you'd like to share with our folks?
Yeah, one of the common questions I get is whether Jenn Marie, which I go by, is my actual name, sorta. So my actual name is Jennifer Marie, and then I do have a last name, but I have a very generic name by design. My parents named me a very generic name, and this was great in the 80s, but nowadays it's not so great because if you Google my name, there's at least 50 results of 50 different Jennifers. I even, working as a spokesperson, got a check for someone with the exact same name as me. She lived in California and I lived in South Carolina at the time. So I have a twin in the same industry, you know. So I realized when I decided to work online that I was going to have to be unique. I already had the domain whoisjennmarie.com from when I was modeling. It was a modeling portfolio for me. And that was when I was trying to brand myself as someone unique as a model. I didn't want to get rid of the domain. It seemed really cool. So I said, why don't I just start my writing company with that name? And it became Jenn Marie Writing and Marketing. True to content branding and content marketing, I use that name on everything. The only place that I don't have Jenn Marie is my LinkedIn, because my LinkedIn was made before all of this stuff happened. But every other piece of content is authored by Jenn Marie, and even my LinkedIn, I've make sure that it's SEO'd for Jenn Marie. So you can
Gotcha.
Google Jenn Marie and still get my LinkedIn, but it has my actual legal name on there if you are able to find it. So I think that's important for anybody. Pick your
Well,
identity, create
and
it, and
particularly important for a branding expert.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I love that. That's a great story. Well, thanks so much, Jen. This has been a great conversation. And what you were just saying, I know you hate writing like how-to kinds of stuff. It sounds like you're more of a storyteller, but just what
Yes.
you just said about that, just the practical implications of a name. Like I just rebranded this podcast, and I spent the last many hours over the last 2 days trying to make sure that it was correctly identified every place. But a lot of things came up with that. So I don't know. Maybe we could collaborate on you make them feel, and I just give them the dull details.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All the feels. That's what I'm about.
sweet. Well, thanks so much, Jen. This has been great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed Jen's insights about branding and user experience as much as I did. In the next episode, I'll talk with Karonda Adair. She takes a stealthy approach to content strategy as she works with her clients, and I'm looking forward to learning more about how she helps her folks with their content. As always, I really appreciate it if you can leave me a rating for this show at iTunes or your favorite podcast store.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.